The lights of Columbia University's event hall shimmered under the camera rigs, blue banners fluttering behind the glass podiums. Chelsea Clinton, donned in her signature navy blazer and a polished smirk, stood center stage as the room buzzed with anticipation. Her panel on "Generational Leadership in a Divided America" had drawn Ivy elites, legacy donors, and media crews from MSNBC to Vogue. But the real buzz? Karoline Leavitt had just entered the back of the room. Karoline, dressed sharply in white, with a cross necklace catching the light with every step, wasn't invited to speak, but she was invited to listen. Or so they said. Chelsea was already mid-sentence when Karoline reached the edge of the crowd. You see, not everyone can inherit the strength it takes to lead with empathy and legacy. Some people spend their whole lives trying to be what they'll never be. That's just reality. It wasn't subtle. Eyes in the crowd darted toward Karoline. Phones tilted. A few gasps echoed from the back. Karoline didn't flinch. She folded her arms. Her jaw tightened. Her lips curved, barely. Chelsea saw it. She turned slightly toward the crowd, then added, voice laced with condescension, and no matter how loud some folks get on cable news, they'll never have what it takes to be us. The silence cracked like glass. Karoline stepped forward, not to the stage, not to interrupt, but simply enough for the cameras to catch her in frame. One Fox reporter whispered, "She's going to say something. Watch." But Karoline didn't say a word. Not yet. She simply looked at Chelsea and raised one eyebrow. The moderator fumbled to regain control. "Let's move forward." Chelsea locked eyes with Karoline for half a second too long. That's when it started. Social media lit up with screenshots. X was flooded. Did Karoline just walk into Chelsea's event uninvited? Chelsea just threw shade. Karoline didn't blink. Is there about to be a live mic drop? And just like that, what began as a polished Ivy panel was about to explode into a generational, ideological collision. Not just between two women, but between two Americas. The auditorium hadn't even settled from the last exchange when Karoline took two bold steps forward. A student, filming from the aisle, muttered under her breath, "She's actually going to speak." And she was. Karoline didn't have a mic. She didn't need one. She locked eyes with Chelsea, lifted her chin, and in the clearest, steadiest voice she'd ever used in public, said 6 words that split the air like thunder. "Thank God I'll never be you." Silence. Followed by a wave of gasps, a few chuckles. Then, applause. Applause from the back, from students, from a few parents who'd traveled miles to hear from real leadership. Chelsea stood stunned, lips parted, blinking rapidly, as though Karoline had violated some unwritten elite rule: you don't talk back to royalty. But Karoline wasn't done. She stepped toward the side podium, just close enough that the standing mic picked her up, and spoke again. "You said I'd never be one of you. You're right. I'll never inherit a last name. I earned mine. I'll never be handed platforms. I build mine. And I'll never walk into a room expecting silence. I expect a challenge. And I welcome it." Students were standing now. Chelsea tried to cut in, "That's not how this works." Karoline didn't flinch. "You're right. It doesn't work this way anymore. You don't get to gatekeep the next generation. You don't get to tell women what qualified looks like, especially not when that definition conveniently excludes anyone who disagrees with you." The moderator stepped forward, frazzled. "Miss Leavitt, please." But it was too late. The clip was already going viral. Phones were raised. The room was electric. And for the first time in the entire conference, Karoline wasn't just present, she was the moment. Chelsea took a step back. The smile was gone. Karoline turned toward the crowd, nodded once, and said one last thing. "This isn't about being them. It's about being free to be us." Outside the auditorium, the air was thick with media chatter. Cameras rolled. Commentators debated. But inside, Karoline stood alone at the edge of the stage, unfazed. Chelsea had stormed off. The moderator was still apologizing to MSNBC and the Clinton Foundation reps in the front row. But Karoline didn't care. She didn't come to bow, she came to challenge. And the students? They stayed. A senior in the back row yelled, "Tell us what they won't." Karoline turned, smiled slightly, and walked back to the podium. This time, no one tried to stop her. She adjusted the mic, took a breath, and dropped the next truth bomb. They say I don't belong here. That I didn't grow up with their last names, their networks, their trust funds. Good. Because if I had, I might have forgotten what it feels like to fight for something real. The students erupted. Faculty looked nervous. But the shift had happened. This wasn't just a speech, it was a cultural detonation. Karoline paced slightly, letting her words hang heavy. They talk about privilege like it's a shield, a birthright to speak and never be questioned. But here's the truth, privilege doesn't intimidate me. It exposes them. It reminds me why I'll never stop pushing, because too many people like you, like me, don't get invited to their table. So I built my own. On the far right side of the room, someone whispered, "She's going viral again." And she was. Clips flooded X, TikTok, and YouTube within minutes. #KarolineUnfiltered was trending. Not because she attacked, but because she refused to be erased. This country doesn't need more heirs to dynasties. It needs disruptors. Truth-tellers. People who don't care if they're liked by the right cocktail crowd. She pointed toward the now empty Clinton section of the stage. They walked away because they couldn't control this moment. But we're still here, and that's exactly what terrifies them. Phones were raised again. And for a moment, just a moment, the room felt less like a campus and more like a cultural battleground. Karoline didn't wait for permission to close. She simply nodded and said, "They write history in private libraries. We write it on the floor of this room, in the open, where every voice matters. Even, and especially, the ones they try to silence." As she stepped down, thunderous applause followed her. The torch hadn't been passed. It had been ripped away. Karoline walked off the podium into a blur of reporters. The Clinton aides had vanished. Campus security lingered awkwardly, waiting for a cue that never came. And in the center of it all, students surrounded her, not to protest, but to thank her. A sophomore in a denim jacket leaned in. "That's the first time someone's ever said what we're all thinking." Karoline nodded, placed a hand on the student's shoulder, and whispered, "Then maybe it's time they listened to you." That moment was clipped and uploaded instantly. Back inside, Chelsea Clinton had re-entered the backstage area, fuming. Her team frantically messaged PR firms and MSNBC anchors, preparing rebuttals. But Chelsea wasn't worried about Karoline's facts. She was worried about Karoline's reach. The establishment was losing its grip, not because of policy shifts, but because their performances no longer moved people. And Karoline? She saw it all happening in real time. When a campus reporter asked her what gave her the confidence to confront legacy figures like Chelsea Clinton, Karoline didn't flinch. "Because I'm not performing. I'm not wearing a mask." And that scares them more than anything. Then she turned back to the crowd. This country was never meant to be handed down like a trust fund. It was meant to be earned, by hard work, by sacrifice, by truth. That's why I speak. That's why I won't stop. A hush fell. Even those who had doubted her hours earlier now found themselves clapping. Karoline pointed at the podium behind her. "They think power is reserved for those born into it. I believe power belongs to those who tell the truth, even when it costs them everything." On X, Tucker Carlson reposted the clip with the caption, "She just ended Chelsea Clinton with one sentence." Conservative media picked it up. Then, surprisingly, so did independents and even some moderate Democrats. A popular Gen Z TikToker posted, "I don't even like Republicans, but Karoline Leavitt just did what no one else would. She called out the royalty of American politics, to their face." Back in the green room, Chelsea saw it all unfold. Her press secretary stammered, "Should we issue a statement?" She didn't respond. Karoline had done what few dared. Not just criticize the Clintons, but reveal how their entitlement had alienated a generation. "This is why they're losing the people," Karoline had said. "Not because we're angry, but because we've stopped pretending they matter more than we do." And the people heard her. Loud, clear, and uncensored. By the next morning, Karoline's clip had racked up 11 million views. But the real shift wasn't happening on screens, it was happening in minds. At Columbia, students who once parroted legacy talking points began to whisper about how Karoline's words actually felt true. In lecture halls and dorms, the divide between elitism and authenticity was on full display. Chelsea's team tried damage control. They pitched her to appear on The View, CNN, even offered a feature op-ed in The Atlantic, all to remind America that the Clintons were still relevant. But Karoline didn't chase media. She showed up at a small church in Brooklyn that week. No press, no handlers. Just her and a community worn down by years of political neglect. She stood up front and said, "I don't care if your last name is Clinton or Kennedy. If your message doesn't speak to the single mom in row 3 or the mechanic in the back row, you've failed. And the American people are done pretending otherwise." That line went even more viral. Then came the pushback. MSNBC's Rachel Maddow opened her segment with a smirk. "Karoline Leavitt, the far-right firebrand, claims to be the new voice of truth. But who is she, really?" Karoline responded with a forward X post. Not born into it. Tens of thousands retweeted it. She wasn't apologizing, she wasn't softening her tone. She was reversing the current, pulling working Americans, disillusioned students, and independent thinkers back toward something raw and real. The Atlantic tried to frame her as dangerous populism. Karoline reposted the article and captioned, "If telling the truth is dangerous, then buckle up." Even some left-leaning commentators admitted, Karoline wasn't just a Republican, she was a movement. Chelsea, meanwhile, remained silent, her advisors still scrambling. What Karoline had revealed was deeper than a political divide. She had exposed the fundamental shift happening in America. Power built on pedigree is crumbling, and the people finally see it. By the end of the week, a Politico headline summed it up best. Chelsea spoke with legacy, Karoline spoke with fire. And America was listening. It had been 3 days since the Columbia stage, and the tension hadn't cooled, it had caught fire. Cable news anchors spun the moment into a partisan circus. MSNBC framed Karoline's mic drop as disrespect cloaked in populism. CNN brought on analysts to question her emotional stability. Even Chelsea's allies in the press tried to brand Karoline as reckless, too young, too hungry for a spotlight she didn't earn. But the public didn't buy it. Because something was spreading faster than legacy media could contain, the clip. Specifically, one line, Karoline's line, "Thank God I'll never be one of you." It had been turned into a TikTok audio, remixing over student protests, war footage, and videos of truckers honking horns. It was stitched with scenes of grocery store workers, veterans, and nurses nodding silently into the camera. One clip showed a girl walking out of her college diversity seminar, mouthing Karoline's words. Another showed a former Democrat voter peeling a Clinton bumper sticker off her mailbox. Karoline hadn't just rejected Chelsea. She had rejected the entire framework of inherited authority, polished deceit, and generational entitlement. And millions agreed with her. Chelsea's camp didn't know how to respond. Every move they made, every think piece, every podcast guest appearance, only seemed to amplify Karoline's authenticity. But Karoline didn't escalate. She returned to New Hampshire and met with dairy farmers, community leaders, and parents fed up with policies that punished effort and rewarded spin. She held no press conference. She gave no national interview. And that, in itself, became the story. While the Clinton machine scrambled to preserve a narrative, Karoline let the American people write one for her. She didn't need legacy to give her power. She had something else, truth, spoken plainly, without permission. And in a country starved for honesty, that was more than enough to lead. The next Sunday, Karoline Leavitt walked into a quiet church in upstate New York. No media, no flash, no team. Just a plain blue dress, her worn Bible, and the cross around her neck. She hadn't announced she'd be there, but someone did. Within 30 minutes, local reporters had shown up, and within an hour, the national cameras followed. The press had been waiting for Karoline to walk back her moment with Chelsea Clinton. To soften her words, to apologize for tone. But Karoline wasn't there for that. As she sat silently in the second row of pews, people from the neighborhood, most of whom had never heard of her before, began to lean in. An elderly couple offered a smile. A young veteran, leaning on a cane, nodded in quiet respect. And behind her, a little girl whispered to her mom, "Is that the lady from the video?" It didn't take long for someone from the back, an aide to a state official, to approach the pastor. Whispers followed, nervous glances. That's when it happened. A woman stepped forward. Not a parishioner, not a pastor, but someone from the governor's office, there on behalf of the state. Kathy Hochul's administration doesn't allow political spectacle in state-affiliated churches, the woman said calmly. We'd like Miss Leavitt to step away from the sanctuary. This is not the place. Karoline didn't rise. She didn't flinch. She reached into her Bible, pulled out a folded page, and stood, softly, without a mic. This page here, she said, her voice clear but quiet, is from Acts 5 verse 29. It says, we must obey God rather than men. I'm not here to stage anything. I'm not here to grandstand. I'm here because the truth isn't owned by governors, or pastors, or parties. She looked directly at the woman from the state. This is not your platform. It's his. Silence fell like a hammer. The cameras, which had expected outrage or defiance, captured something deeper, reverence. Stillness. Conviction. Then a single clap. Then two. Then the whole room stood, not in protest of the governor, not in favor of Karoline, but in awe of the courage to speak without permission. Karoline didn't shout. She simply turned, placed the folded page back into her Bible, and sat down. As Karoline exited the church later that afternoon, the sun caught the edge of the cross around her neck, glinting just long enough to capture the attention of the photographers waiting by the gates. But she didn't stop for interviews. She didn't perform. She walked straight past the cameras, until a teenage girl stepped forward from the crowd. No press badge. No microphone. Just trembling hands and eyes full of tears. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "How did you know you were allowed to speak?" Karoline paused. She took the girl's hand, steadying her voice as she replied. "I didn't," Karoline said. But truth doesn't wait for permission. That moment went viral. Not because it was loud, but because it was raw. The clip traveled through TikTok like wildfire. No slogans, no edits, just the exchange between two women, one just beginning her path, the other refusing to be told hers was over. But what exploded the narrative came the next morning. Governor Kathy Hochul, pressed by media about the incident at the church, doubled down. "We will not allow extremist rhetoric to infect sacred spaces under the jurisdiction of the state. If Ms. Leavitt continues to provoke, we'll respond accordingly." Karoline's team said nothing. Instead, Karoline showed up, uninvited again, at a small community center in Rochester. A veterans' luncheon. No cameras. No tweets. But the veterans streamed it themselves. She didn't speak from a stage. She didn't quote the Constitution. She didn't wear a flag pin or give a speech. She listened. To a Vietnam vet with a speech impediment. To a Marine mom who lost 2 sons. To a black chaplain who said, "You remind me of someone I marched beside in Selma." Karoline only spoke once, at the very end. "They say I'm not welcome. That I'm a firebrand. That I bring division. But truth doesn't come with seatbelts." It walks in, ready or not. And as if on cue, someone in the back shouted, "That's why we fought." The room erupted, not in applause, but in something deeper. Recognition. Karoline wasn't just speaking anymore. She had become a mirror, reflecting something the establishment couldn't contain and the media couldn't define. Truth had walked in. And nobody had the authority to escort it back out. The clip of Karoline at the veterans' luncheon had done more than go viral. It broke through the algorithmic walls the media had spent years building. It wasn't a campaign ad. It wasn't even meant to be shared. But that raw, handheld footage, her voice soft, the camera shaky, hit something in Americans that polished pundits couldn't touch. Authenticity. By the next evening, Hochul's office had gone silent. MSNBC tried pivoting to another story. CNN tried labeling the moment strategic manipulation. But Karoline didn't answer any of them. She flew to Buffalo. Not for a speech. Not for a protest. For a funeral. A retired NYPD officer, Hispanic, lifelong Democrat, Vietnam veteran. His son had DM'd Karoline after the luncheon, saying, "My dad always said he'd rather have truth at his funeral than flowers." She came. Quietly. Sat with the family. And when it was time to speak, the family invited her up. No cameras. No headlines. Just Karoline, her hands shaking slightly, standing beside the casket of a man she'd never met, and saying, "I never knew him. But I know this, men like him built this country. And if telling the truth gets you labeled dangerous, then so be it. I'd rather be dangerous than dishonest." That line didn't need a mic. The room carried it. But someone recorded it. Again, it wasn't planned. It wasn't edited. And again, it exploded. That night, one of Hochul's own aides anonymously leaked a statement to a journalist: "Every time we try to silence her, she gets louder. But not with a megaphone. With moments." The next morning, Karoline posted just 2 words on X. "Still standing." And that was it. Thousands of comments flooded in. From truckers. From mothers. From soldiers and students, and even a few unexpected names, liberal ones. They weren't all saying they agreed with her politics. They were saying something much louder. She doesn't flinch. And that's when it became clear, this wasn't about policy anymore. It was about posture. Courage. The refusal to fold when cornered. And as she stepped onto a small, barely lit stage in Albany 2 days later, invited this time, reluctantly, Karoline looked out at a divided crowd and said, "I wasn't supposed to be here. But the truth? It shows up whether it's on the guest list or not." The auditorium was packed. New York's political elite filled the rows, strategists, donors, columnists, and more than a few silent critics. The event, originally scheduled to highlight unity across leadership, had suddenly become a test of tolerance. Karoline Leavitt had been added to the program last minute, thanks to pressure from veterans groups and 2 state senators who crossed party lines. Kathy Hochul sat in the front row, arms folded. Chelsea Clinton had tweeted an eye-roll emoji earlier that morning. The press was ready for fireworks. But when Karoline walked in, hair pulled back, no entourage, no flashy intro music, there was a strange shift. Some whispered. Some chuckled. 1 or 2 booed. She nodded once, then climbed the steps to the stage. "I know why they didn't want me here," she began. "It's not because I'm dangerous. It's because I'm inconvenient." The first ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. They say this is a place for unity. But what they really mean is conformity. You're welcome, as long as you agree. She paused. "I don't agree." Silence now. She didn't shout. She didn't pace. She just stood still and told the story of the veteran's funeral. Of the teacher who got fired for quoting the Constitution. Of the factory worker who told her, "They don't want people like us to speak because we don't have the right degrees, but we've got something better. We've got reality." She ended with a single sentence. This isn't about right or left anymore. It's about who's willing to stand while others kneel to silence. A full beat of silence. Then applause. Scattered. Hesitant. Then spreading like wildfire. Even some who had sneered stood up. Reporters scrambled. Phones shot up to record. Hochul looked stunned. Clinton looked away. Karoline left the stage without another word. Backstage, an aide whispered, "That was the loudest silence I've ever heard." Karoline just smiled. She didn't need to win them all. She just needed to wake them up, one crowd, one podium, one truth at a time. Karoline steps back to the podium one last time. The room is silent. She doesn't yell. She doesn't raise a finger. She just looks directly into the camera and speaks with firm clarity. "I was never here to be liked. I didn't show up for applause. I came because someone had to say it, and I wasn't going to wait for permission. They called me names. They tried to erase me, cancel me, bury me under their headlines. But guess what? I'm still standing. And I'm not standing alone. You see, this moment was never just about me and Chelsea, or Hillary, or Schiff, or any of them. It's about the millions of Americans who've been told to sit down, shut up, and stay silent. And to them I say, not anymore. You're not too young. You're not too loud. You're not too late. You're exactly what this country needs. And no legacy media, no dynasty, no bureaucrat behind a podium can change that." She glances toward the back of the room, then adds. "So let them laugh. Let them sneer. Let them underestimate us. Because the next time they hear from us, we won't just be on their screens. We'll be at their polls, at their podiums, and yes, sitting in their seats. You wanted a quiet girl. You got a storm." She nods once. Mic drop. The room erupts.